Royal tensions explode as William shouts at Camilla's guard during Kate's recovery. The atmosphere inside the royal palace had always been full of tradition, formality, and an invisible line that few dared to cross. Life in the public eye had never been easy for any member of the royal family, but lately, the tension seemed heavier than usual. The usually calm and composed Prince William had been quieter, more reserved. His schedule had changed, and even his expressions seemed more thoughtful, more focused, more concerned. That concern, of course, was directed toward one person, his wife, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Kate had recently undergone a medical procedure that required a long and careful recovery. The royal family did not share every detail with the public, but it was known that she needed rest, privacy, and support. For Prince William, this time was especially difficult. Not only was he managing his royal responsibilities, but he was also trying to stay close to Kate, be there for their children, and protect their space during her healing. He had always been a hands-on father and a deeply committed husband. Now, more than ever, his protective nature came to the surface. Life at the palace had slowly adjusted to Kate's absence from public events. The halls she once walked with grace now felt quieter. The smiles she offered during charity events, the confident speeches she delivered, and the warmth she brought to the royal image were missed by many. But inside the palace, her recovery remained the most important matter to her husband. Prince William had started spending more time at home, keeping his schedule light and focusing on the family. Palace staff noticed he would often check in on the medical team, ask detailed questions, and make sure everything Kate needed was within reach. He was polite but firm. His voice, though never raised, carried the weight of a husband doing all he could. At the same time, Queen Camilla was becoming more present in the royal calendar. With King Charles balancing health matters of his own and Kate stepping back from public duties, Camilla had taken on a more prominent role. She attended engagements with dignity and carried out her royal functions carefully. With this added responsibility, she had also made some changes to her own team, including adding new members to her security detail. These guards were highly trained, professional, and took their orders seriously. But they were new. They didn't yet know the daily rhythm of the palace, or the small, unspoken traditions that had quietly existed for years. They followed strict guidelines, sometimes without understanding the softer rules of the household, the personal spaces, the private routines, and the delicate moments that required silence rather than command. One such space was a private corridor in the palace that led to a small indoor garden. This quiet place had become a favorite retreat for Kate during her recovery. It was peaceful, surrounded by greenery, and offered the gentle sound of birdsong from nearby windows. It was where Kate could take short walks, stretch her legs under the watch of her medical team, or simply enjoy a moment of fresh air away from the palace walls. William had made it clear that this space was important for her healing and should be kept private. On one particular morning, as the sun rose over London and light spilled into the palace, William prepared to visit Kate. He had just returned from a brief public engagement and wanted to check in on her before beginning the rest of his day. He walked with quiet urgency, his mind full of thoughts, some about the country but mostly about her. He turned the corner, heading toward the private corridor as he had done many times before, but this time was different. Standing at the entrance of the corridor was one of Queen Camilla's newly assigned guards. The man was alert, upright, and clearly performing his duty with dedication. As Prince William approached, the guard held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. "Restricted area, sir," the guard said politely but firmly. For a brief moment, William blinked, surprised. He wasn't used to being blocked from this path, especially not when heading to see his wife. He took a calm breath and explained, "I'm visiting the Princess of Wales." "This is the way." The guard, unfamiliar with the private routines and unaware of Kate's personal recovery space, replied with the same firmness, "My orders are to keep this section closed until further notice. I apologize, sir." The hallway grew quiet. The soft ticking of a nearby clock was the only sound for a few seconds. William wasn't angry, but he was surprised, and that surprise quickly turned into discomfort. He had been walking this path for weeks. It was part of a sensitive and personal time for his family. Now it was being blocked by someone new who didn't seem to understand the context. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout, but his tone changed, still controlled but stronger. "This is not a restricted area," he said clearly. "This space has been designated for the princess's recovery. I expect it to remain private for her use and accessible to me." The guard hesitated. It was a moment of confusion, not defiance. He wasn't trying to disrespect anyone. He simply didn't have all the information. Still, in that moment, something invisible passed between them. Not a fight, but a crack in the palace routine. William gave a final nod and stepped forward. The guard, realizing his mistake, stepped aside immediately, apologizing under his breath. The prince walked through, his steps quiet but purposeful. Behind him, the guard stood still, uncertain if he had just made a small error or something far more serious. Word of the brief encounter didn't take long to spread. Staff nearby had noticed the exchange, and even though no one raised their voice, the message was clear. Something had changed. Tension, which had quietly built over weeks, had now made itself known. Camilla, when informed of the moment, was surprised too. She respected William and had always maintained a careful balance with the younger royals. But her staff had acted under her direction, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that lines of communication were breaking down. William, meanwhile, returned to Kate's side. He said nothing of the moment. He greeted her with warmth, asked how she was feeling, and sat beside her for a few quiet minutes. But inside, he was thoughtful. The palace, a place built on stability and routine, was starting to feel unpredictable. And this was only the beginning. The palace was supposed to be a place where everything worked smoothly. Each person knew their job, every moment was planned, and every member of the family followed traditions. But ever since Kate had taken a break to recover, a quiet sense of uncertainty had begun to grow inside those famous royal walls. What had happened between Prince William and one of Queen Camilla's new guards had been small on the surface, but the feeling it left behind was much bigger. Staff who worked in the palace every day could sense the change. They noticed how Prince William walked faster than usual, how his face showed signs of worry more often, and how his attention seemed focused on making sure nothing disturbed Kate's healing. He was not angry, but he was alert. It was clear to everyone that his patience was thinner than before, and his need to protect his wife was stronger than ever. People who had worked in the palace for years whispered quietly about the moment when William had been stopped by the guard. Though he had not raised his voice loudly or spoken unkindly, the tension in his words had been sharp. Some wondered how the misunderstanding had happened in the first place. Others believed it was a simple mistake by a new member of staff. But a few began to wonder if something deeper was going on, a shift in how power and control were being handled inside the palace. Queen Camilla's team had grown in recent months. With more public appearances and important duties to manage, she had brought in new advisors, new helpers, and a new security team. These changes were meant to support her growing responsibilities. But as with any change, not everyone was comfortable with it, especially when it touched areas that had once been private and peaceful, like Kate's recovery space. For William, it wasn't just about a blocked hallway. It was about the feeling that something personal was being crossed, that his wife's peace was being disturbed, that her space, a place where she was supposed to feel calm and protected, was suddenly being treated like just another hallway to control. One afternoon, shortly after the quiet incident, William was walking with a close advisor through one of the palace gardens. The advisor had been with him for years, someone who understood him without needing many words. "I didn't make a scene," William said calmly. "But I wasn't going to let it slide either," the advisor nodded. "Of course not, that's her space, she needs it." William looked down at the ground as he walked. "It's not just about her, it's everything, the quiet changes, the way things are being managed. I don't want to fight about it, but I also won't stay silent if it affects her." Meanwhile, Queen Camilla had also heard about the hallway issue. Her team explained it to her quickly and carefully. They said it had been a misunderstanding, that the guard had simply followed the orders given to him. But Camilla wasn't pleased. She didn't like the idea that her staff had caused any discomfort to William, or that people were now talking about tension between their sides. In her private sitting room, Camilla spoke with her senior aide, a woman who had helped her navigate many difficult moments before. "I don't want any division," Camilla said, stirring her tea gently. "But I also expect my team to follow what I've asked." The aide spoke softly. "Of course, Your Majesty, perhaps a quiet word between you and the prince might help ease things." Camilla sighed. "Maybe, but let's not act like it's a major issue just yet. Hopefully it ends there." but it didn't. A few days later, another small moment added more weight to the situation. A staff member from Camilla's team walked into a shared meeting room earlier than expected and began rearranging some materials for an upcoming royal event. That room had already been set up by one of William's aides, who had carefully prepared it based on Kate's notes before she took her break. It was meant to reflect her choices, her ideas. When William heard about the changes, he didn't get upset, but his response was firm once again. He asked that the materials be returned to their original order and reminded everyone that Kate's involvement, even during her recovery, was not to be pushed aside. Each of these events on their own might have seemed small, but together they were starting to feel like pieces of a larger puzzle. A quiet tug-of-war between two sides of the family, not built on anger, but on differences in style, approach, and values. William valued routine, familiarity, and protecting the family's private moments. Camilla, on the other hand, valued structure, duty, and keeping things moving forward. Neither of them meant harm, but the overlap in their roles had begun to cause friction. The palace staff found themselves caught in the middle. Some worked closely with William, others with Camilla. Each side felt a growing pressure to do things their way. Whispered conversations became more frequent in staff corridors. Aides double-checked schedules to avoid accidental overlaps. Meetings became more formal. Smiles were still exchanged, but they were shorter, a little more careful. The media, for the most part, knew nothing about these small inner tensions. The public saw a calm palace, photos of smiling royals, and updates about Kate's recovery being private and respectful. But behind those smiles, things were shifting in ways the public didn't see. At home, William kept his focus on his family. He read books to his children, sat by Kate during her quiet moments, and even helped plan some of the children's routines himself. Every moment outside the spotlight was a moment he valued deeply. He didn't speak much about the hallway incident again, but it had clearly marked something in his mind. Camilla, too, continued with her public work. She opened libraries, visited hospitals, and supported the king in his events. She remained composed and professional, but those who knew her well noticed she had grown more cautious when discussing family matters. In the evenings, the palace grew quiet. Lights turned off one by one, and only the sound of footsteps echoed softly through the hallways. But even in the silence, the unspoken tension remained, present in the way staff moved, the way orders were given, and the way paths crossed with a little more hesitation. What had started as a misunderstanding in a corridor had now turned into something more, a moment that reminded everyone inside the palace that even in a family built on duty and grace, emotions still played a part. Especially when someone you love is recovering, and all you want is to keep them safe. Prince William continued to walk those same palace halls with care, always thinking of Kate, always watching the small details that others might miss. And somewhere deep in the background, a quiet question remained. How much longer could these small tensions stay hidden before they became something bigger? The days inside the palace moved forward as they always did, filled with meetings, events, carefully planned schedules, and quiet traditions. On the surface, everything looked calm. The royal family continued to perform their duties. The press covered Kate's recovery with warmth and understanding, while the rest of the royals carried on. But beneath the calm surface, something felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air that only those closest to the family could truly feel. After the moment between Prince William and Queen Camilla's guard, things didn't return to normal right away. People tried to move on, of course. The staff continued their work, the corridors were cleaned and polished, the tea was served right on time. But the feeling that something wasn't quite right remained. It hung in the palace like a quiet echo, never loud, but always there. For Prince William, each day was still centered around one thing, Kate. He visited her as often as he could. Sometimes he stayed for just a few minutes, other times he sat by her side for hours. He held her hand, listened to her speak softly, and reminded her how loved she was. Watching her recover slowly filled him with both hope and worry. Some days were better than others. Some days she smiled. Other days she simply rested with her eyes closed. He didn't show the stress on his face when he was with her. He smiled gently, stayed calm, and made sure she never saw how tired he felt. But once he stepped outside her room, it was clear that the weight on his shoulders was growing heavier. He had work to do, meetings to attend, and appearances to make. but his heart was always with her. It was during one of these quieter afternoons that a small mistake brought back the uneasy feeling he had tried to ignore. One of Camilla's aides, who was helping prepare for a formal family dinner, entered a part of the residence that had recently been kept quiet to support Kate's recovery. The aide, not fully aware of how sensitive the area was, spoke a little too loudly on the phone while walking past Kate's private wing. The noise wasn't extreme, but in a place where calmness had been carefully maintained, it was enough to make William's personal assistant take notice. Word quickly reached William. He didn't react with frustration. He didn't raise his voice. But his face became serious, and he asked firmly that all staff be reminded about the importance of quiet and privacy around Kate's area. He requested that no meetings, calls, or walkthroughs happen near her space without first checking with him or a senior member of his team. It was another small moment, like the one with the guard, but it added to a growing feeling of discomfort. William didn't want special treatment. He simply wanted to make sure Kate's recovery was peaceful and respected. To him, these requests weren't about control, they were about care. However, not everyone saw it that way. Some members of Camilla's team began to quietly wonder if William was becoming too protective. They whispered that perhaps his emotions were clouding his usual calm and steady way of handling things. Others defended him, saying that anyone in his place would feel the same. After all, he was a husband, not just a prince. And his wife was going through something deeply personal. The situation became more complicated when one of Camilla's close staff members mentioned in a private meeting that William's instructions had caused confusion. "We're all working toward the same goal," the person said. "But we're starting to get mixed messages. One day we're told to prepare rooms, and the next day we're told to avoid those same areas." The staff felt caught in the middle. They didn't want to upset anyone, but they also didn't want to make mistakes. Every small action now carried extra weight. Even simple decisions like which hallway to use or which time to deliver a message were double-checked, just in case. Queen Camilla, upon hearing the concerns, was thoughtful. She understood that William was going through a challenging time. She didn't want to add pressure to his life, but she also believed in keeping the household running smoothly. She spoke with her senior staff and reminded them to be respectful, but also to stay firm in their responsibilities. Still, the feeling of unease didn't go away. Meetings between both sides of the household, William's and Camilla's, became less frequent. There were no open arguments, no angry words, but communication slowly grew colder. People spoke more formally. Jokes that once brought laughter now felt out of place. The sense of teamwork was slowly turning into quiet separation. For William, these small shifts did not go unnoticed. He had always tried to build a warm and respectful connection with the rest of the family. He admired his father, respected Camilla's position, and tried to be a steady force in the family. But now, as he watched things slowly change around him, he wondered if something deeper was beginning to unfold. One evening, William spoke to a trusted friend who didn't work in the palace but knew him well. "I never wanted things to feel like this," William said. "But I can't ignore it. I just want her to get better. That's all that matters." The friend nodded. "You're doing your best. People will understand that in time." "I hope so," William replied quietly. "Because right now it feels like every move is being watched, every word is being judged." Outside the palace, the public remained unaware of the quiet drama. The media continued to report kindly on Kate's recovery. Fans from around the world sent her letters, flowers, and well wishes. The royal family thanked the public for their support and asked for continued privacy. Everything looked peaceful, but inside, the sense of division continued to grow. Not because anyone wanted conflict, but because emotions were high and the stakes felt personal. Even the palace routine seemed different now. Meals were shorter. Planning sessions ended earlier. Some staff requested to be moved to different departments. The lines between Camilla's circle and William's team were becoming clearer, not through any open disagreements, but through small choices made each day. There were still moments of kindness. A warm smile exchanged in the hallway. A door held open. A quiet thank you shared between two aides. These gestures showed that no one wanted the situation to get worse. Everyone still hoped things would return to normal. But in a place where every action was part of a much bigger picture, even the smallest misunderstanding could lead to lasting effects. William tried to keep his focus on what mattered most. He spent more time with his children, helped with their studies, and made sure they felt loved and secure. He visited Kate every day, listened to her thoughts, and shared gentle stories to lift her spirits. These moments reminded him why he cared so deeply and why he was willing to speak up, even when it made things uncomfortable. Camilla, too, continued with her duties, balancing public events and private conversations with the king. She stayed calm, careful, and composed. But even she knew that something had shifted in the royal household. It wasn't just about staff or schedules anymore. It was about the feeling that not everyone was walking in the same direction. And while no one said it out loud, there was a quiet question in the hearts of many. Could this be resolved before it grew into something larger? The palace lights glowed softly at night. Guards stood at their posts. Staff moved quietly through the halls. And inside the royal walls, where history had been made for generations, a new chapter was slowly beginning, one filled with concern, care, and choices that would shape the future. It had been several weeks since the quiet tensions had begun to form inside the palace. Most people outside still had no idea that anything unusual was happening behind the tall gates. To the public, everything looked calm. Official photos still showed smiles, scheduled events continued, and statements from the palace remained polite and warm. But inside those grand walls, the royal family was trying to keep a delicate balance. Prince William, focused deeply on his wife's healing journey, had grown more careful in every decision he made. Queen Camilla, trying to manage her own responsibilities, was doing her best to keep things running without adding to the stress. But even with everyone trying to do what they believed was right, the small misunderstandings and differences in approach had quietly grown larger. The king, though not always involved in the day-to-day matters, had begun to notice the change in mood. He had watched his son grow from a young boy into a strong, thoughtful leader. He had seen the bond between William and Kate, and he understood why this time was so emotional for him. He also knew Camilla's intentions were never to create conflict. She had stepped into her royal role with care and patience, and her staff followed her lead with professionalism. One morning, the king decided that it was time to step in, not as a ruler, but as a father and a husband. He didn't want the small tensions to grow into lasting division. He understood that both William and Camilla were under pressure, and that sometimes, when people cared too much, even good intentions could lead to confusion. He arranged a quiet meeting. There was no grand invitation, no formal schedule, just a calm, respectful request for a private conversation. The king asked both William and Camilla to join him in one of the palace's more private sitting rooms. It was a peaceful place, far from the busy areas, with tall windows and shelves filled with books. A gentle light came through the windows that morning, and the room felt calm. William arrived first, dressed neatly but simply, carrying a notebook filled with notes and reminders. Camilla arrived shortly after with her reading glasses in hand and a composed expression on her face. They greeted each other politely. There was no anger, no sharpness, just a careful, quiet air between them. The king entered the room slowly, his steps thoughtful. He smiled gently and asked the staff to give them privacy. He began the conversation in a soft voice. "I know this has been a difficult time for everyone," he said. "Kate's recovery is important to all of us, and I know both of you care deeply about doing the right thing." William nodded. Camilla listened closely. The king continued, "But I've been hearing things, small things, yes, but they matter. Misunderstandings between teams, tension in planning, moments that didn't feel quite right. And I think we need to talk about it, not to find blame, but to find peace." William spoke first. His tone was respectful but clear. "I haven't tried to cause problems, but Kate's recovery has been delicate. There were times when I felt that her privacy, her space, wasn't being fully respected. I only acted when I thought it was necessary." Camilla responded softly, "And I never meant to step into that space. My team has had to take on new tasks, and I admit we may have moved too quickly in some areas. I'm truly sorry if that added pressure." The king nodded. "This is exactly why I brought us here. You're both coming from a place of care. But perhaps the way things have unfolded has left some feelings unspoken." They sat together for nearly an hour. There was no shouting, no cold silence. Instead, they shared thoughts, explained situations, and listened. William spoke of how the smallest things, like a loud voice in the hallway or a door opening unexpectedly, could affect Kate's peace of mind during her recovery. Camilla spoke about how her growing duties required new systems, but she admitted that some staff may not have fully understood the unspoken rules of certain spaces in the palace. By the end of the conversation, something had shifted. Not everything was solved, but a door had opened. There was understanding where there had once been quiet tension. They agreed on a few things right away. First, they would improve communication between their teams. A special contact would be assigned from both sides to make sure all plans, movements, and access were shared clearly and respectfully. Second, they would set quiet zones in certain areas of the palace, where Kate's recovery would not be disturbed. These zones would be known and respected by everyone, including new staff. Lastly, they agreed to meet again, just the three of them, before any major changes were made that could affect shared spaces or sensitive schedules. It was a step toward peace, a sign that even inside the most formal palace, people could still sit down and talk heart to heart. After the meeting, the palace atmosphere began to shift again, this time in a better direction. Staff noticed that communication became smoother. Schedules were shared more openly, rooms were no longer double-booked. The whispers in the hallway started to fade. Prince William looked more at ease. He still stayed close to Kate, of course, but his expression was softer. He knew that even though he had felt alone in protecting her space, he was now supported. Camilla's team, too, became more aware. They walked a little more carefully in certain areas, spoke with more kindness, and began building bridges with William's staff. The king continued to watch quietly from the background, offering gentle guidance when needed. He was pleased to see that the family was moving together again, rather than drifting apart. Kate, though still resting, began to notice the difference too. Her private wing felt more peaceful, more cared for. She smiled more. She asked about the children, laughed at small jokes, and even began reading again. The healing process, slow and quiet, had become a little more steady. The press had no idea that this peaceful shift had come from a heartfelt conversation behind closed doors. They continued to report that Kate was recovering well and that the royal family was focused on unity. And in a way, that was true. The palace itself began to feel warmer again. There were fewer rushed footsteps, more polite exchanges, and a feeling that perhaps, even in a place where tradition ruled, people could still learn to adapt, understand each other, and move forward with grace. Late one evening, as the sun set over the palace gardens, William stood near one of the tall windows. He looked out at the sky, his hands gently resting on the windowsill. A soft breeze came in through the slightly open glass. Behind him, one of his most trusted staff members stepped into the room. "Everything's calm tonight," the staff member said quietly. William nodded. "Yes," he replied. "It finally feels like we're all on the same side again." The staff member smiled and stepped away, leaving the prince alone with his thoughts. William stayed there for a while, thinking about Kate, about his family, and about the quiet strength it took to hold everything together. And in that moment, inside one of the most well-known homes in the world, peace had found its way back. One quiet step at a time. Time had passed, and slowly, things inside the palace had started to feel more normal. The quiet talks, small adjustments, and patient steps taken by the royal family had helped bring calm to a place that had felt tense for weeks. There was still a sense of care in how people moved, spoke, and made decisions, but it no longer came from fear of upsetting anyone. It now came from understanding and respect. Prince William was feeling more balanced. He still carried the weight of many responsibilities, but his focus had always been clear. His family came first. With the support from his father, better communication with Camilla, and the cooperation of palace staff, he was finally able to breathe a little easier. The biggest change of all was Kate's progress. Her recovery had been slow but steady. She had gone from needing full rest in quiet rooms to taking gentle walks again. The smiles on her face became more frequent, and her voice carried a little more strength each day. Her children, who missed her dearly, were overjoyed to see their mother laughing, reading, and spending more time with them. The staff around her, carefully trained to work with kindness and patience, played a big role in creating a peaceful environment. They had learned to move gently, speak softly, and protect her space from unnecessary noise or movement. Everyone had worked together to help her heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. William, who had never left her side for long, felt proud of her strength. Watching her improve made every long day and difficult conversation worth it. Every time he saw her laugh with their children or sit peacefully in the garden, he felt a quiet sense of happiness. One early afternoon, something special happened. Kate decided to take a short walk in one of the palace courtyards, a place she had always loved. The sun was warm, the flowers were in bloom, and the birds sang softly in the background. She walked slowly, her steps careful but full of grace. Beside her, William walked proudly, gently supporting her arm when needed. A few members of the staff watched from a distance, their hearts lifted by the simple but powerful moment. This quiet return to routine meant more than just a physical step forward. It marked the return of someone deeply loved and admired, not just by her family, but by the entire country. The royal family had always been seen as strong, but Kate's quiet courage and patience reminded everyone that true strength also lies in softness, in healing, and in love. As Kate continued to regain her strength, the royal family began to plan for her slow return to public life. There was no rush. William made sure of that. Every decision was taken with care. Nothing was forced. The goal was simple, to let Kate move forward at her own pace with the support of those who loved her. The media soon began to notice small signs of her return, a photo of her walking with William, a message she sent to a charity, a short video call with a children's hospital she had long supported. People across the country and around the world were touched. Letters of encouragement continued to arrive, full of kind words and warm wishes. Back inside the palace, things also improved between William and Camilla. The earlier misunderstandings were slowly replaced by calm and cooperation. Their teams spoke more clearly with each other. Meetings were better organized. Schedules were shared. The quiet tension that had once filled the palace had faded. Camilla, too, felt more at ease. She continued her royal duties with grace, but she also made sure her team stayed respectful of family spaces and sensitive situations. She knew now how important it was to listen not only to formal requests, but also to the unspoken feelings that sometimes said more than words. The king watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. He had seen a storm rise inside the palace, and he had helped guide his family through it, not by giving strict orders, but by encouraging conversation, understanding, and forgiveness. As summer approached, the royal family began preparing for a small family event. It would be Kate's first quiet appearance with the family since her recovery had begun. It was not a large public event. There would be no press or photographers, just close family, a quiet setting, and a chance to be together again. On the day of the event, the palace felt full of gentle excitement. The staff arranged everything with care: flowers, food, music. The children laughed and ran in the garden. William helped Kate prepare, his smile never fading. When she entered the room, dressed simply but beautifully, a soft hush fell over the space. Everyone turned to look at her, not with surprise but with admiration. She walked confidently, her eyes bright and full of warmth. It was not just her presence that touched everyone, it was the journey she had taken to return to that moment. Camilla stepped forward and greeted her with kindness. They exchanged gentle words. There was no trace of past tension, just mutual respect. The king embraced his daughter-in-law warmly, his eyes shining with emotion. And William, standing beside Kate, looked more at peace than he had in months. That evening, after the event ended and the guests had left, the palace grew quiet again. William and Kate sat together near a window, watching the sky turn soft shades of pink and orange. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with love and understanding. William took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You did it," he whispered. Kate smiled. "We did." Outside, the world continued as always, cars passing, lights flickering on in nearby homes, people going about their lives. But inside the palace, a quiet chapter had come to a close. The challenges they had faced had not broken them. They had brought them closer. The misunderstandings had not divided them forever. They had helped them grow. The stress and pressure had not taken away their joy. It had reminded them how precious it really was. In the weeks that followed, Kate continued to heal. She returned to a few of her royal duties slowly. The public welcomed her with open arms. Her presence brought joy wherever she went. People were reminded of her kindness, her strength, and her role not only as a royal figure, but as a caring wife, mother, and woman. William remained by her side in everything. He continued his public work, supported his family, and helped guide the future of the monarchy. But more than anything, he protected what mattered most: the peace, love, and unity of the people closest to him. And while many would remember the earlier stories about tension and misunderstandings, the true story, the one that mattered, was this. A family found its way back to each other through honesty, patience, and quiet strength. The palace lights continued to shine, but now they seemed just a little warmer. The halls felt a little more peaceful. And in the hearts of those who lived there was a sense of calm, not because nothing had gone wrong, but because love and understanding had helped make things right again.